So if somebody asked you what's the worst $500 GPU this year of all time, maybe you would have an answer, maybe not. $500 is like that magical number that it seems really expensive if you go over it. Under it, you're getting close. But then when you have guys like this is the 4060. And I was probably the only one to buy it that day just because I need to test it. Otherwise, they would have had like no sales. But at least that's $299 with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. You can make some argument where that kind of works. When Nvidia announced the 4060 Ti, a couple of eyebrows were raised because, first, there were two versions. The first version at $399 has the same 8 gigabytes of VRAM as this GPU, this 4060. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. I even did a little funny video the other day where I was playing this on Diablo 4 and I ran out of VRAM. Now obviously the video, I did it really quick and it shows it, as a joke running out quickly, but I was really not playing that long and I got that message. And of course I was playing on Ultra and it's on ultra wide, so it's not like it was 1080p. It was more like a humorous video, but still, that means that there are going to be scenarios where you're not even talking about 4K, even 1440p, where you may just run out of VRAM. That's why Nvidia knew they had to announce this other GPU, the 4060 Ti with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. There are a couple of problems though. The first problem is the price. $499 is sort of the starting MSRP for this GPU. And we know that just like this guy here is supposed to be $299, this particular one is $299. You'll have some that are $329. You'll have some up to $350. The same thing happens with the 4060 Ti. You may have various third-party AIB models that will be in that $500 range. Nvidia isn't making a Founders Edition. They only made it for the 8 gigabyte version. So it remains to be seen. I think they'll probably try to keep most of the prices around $499 just because they know that they're having a very tough time selling these GPUs. Look at what they had to do with the 4060. They had to give it to some influencers early so that way people can maybe get hyped up. I don't know what they were trying to do, but it's definitely not working because nobody is buying that GPU. The 4060 Ti has that big problem of the price. $499 is kind of a nasty price for a 4060 Ti. That really should have been the 4070. Now, the 4070, I've played on that very same system that I had problems with the 4060 in terms of VRAM. 12 gigabytes of VRAM was okay. Never had the same problem as I had on the 4060 or even on the 4060 Ti. I would say the 4070 is the first high-end GPU in that stack that can handle other resolutions aside from 1080p. It can do 1440p, and you can reasonably max out most of the settings, including ray tracing. Actually does fairly well, even really demanding games. And of course, it does have DLSS 3. So if we're talking about a 4070 versus 4060 Ti, any day of the week, I'm going to pick the 4070. Obviously, it's $599, but then we're only talking about $100 difference now between the 16 gigabyte version. In my opinion, the 16 gigabyte version just doesn't offer anything, and that's the second problem. You may think that 16 gigabytes of VRAM, wow, that's amazing, but in these type of games, unless it's some very specific scenarios like you're playing at high resolutions, like I had with Diablo 4, generally, that type of GPU at 1080p, 8 gigabytes of VRAM, while it's stressed out in many, many games already at Ultra, going to 16 gigabytes really is kind of just big overkill. You're probably not going to use anywhere near that. The bigger problem is the GPU basically has the same, rasterization performance as the regular $399 4060 Ti. It's not like you're gaining a massive amount of frame rates. In some scenarios where the VRAM is a bottleneck, of course, you may see higher frame rates. That's going to be one of the effects of just having more VRAM, but it's still going to be the same, narrow memory bit bus. Even though it has more L2 cache than last generation, it's still not enough to get through, the memory bandwidth problem. And with that in mind, the performance FPS, like what most people gauge performance as, probably is going to be very close from what we've seen so far. Even from Nvidia's very own, their numbers that they put out, the performance really wasn't all that much better on the 16 gigabyte version. Aside from some memory starved scenarios, that's really what you're going to get. I would prefer a 4070 any day of the week over that GPU, just because it's going to perform a lot better. Even though it only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM at something like 1440p, you can sort of get away with using that. I mean, even the 4070 Ti, which some models sell for over $1,000, like that Asus Strix model, even that at only 12 gigabytes of VRAM is considered a fairly high-end GPU. So if that can do it, the 4070 can as well. I think what should have happened is the 4060 Ti should have been released in only one version, a 16 gigabyte version, and just put it at $399. At that price, I think it would have had less drawbacks and compromise. At $499, people just are not going to want it at all. This is going to be probably the worst release of any GPU. The 4060 Ti and 4060, of course, were terrible releases in terms of like people not buying, but the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte, I think is going to be really bad, because 16 gigabytes of VRAM, that's not enough to entice people to spend that much money. Look at what other GPUs we had at $499. The 3070, for example, even going to the 3060 Ti at $399, that one didn't perform that much worse than a 3070, and they both had 8 gigabytes of VRAM. That was a phenomenal GPU for $399 back when it came out. Now we're talking about similar performance. The 4060 Ti isn't really that much better, aside from a few percentage points here and there, than the 3060 Ti, and certainly not the 3070. And you're talking about a $499 price. That is a major problem, and it's almost like we've been watching a very slow Nvidia train wreck. While they focus on AI, the GPU market has been absolutely terrible. And of course, we understand that some pricing had to go up because that's how things happen over time. Who knows exactly if costs went up here or there, but even if you count inflation and everything else that's going on, the amount that Nvidia increased the pricing on their products way goes beyond that. Look at the 3080, for example. From $699, it went to over $1,200 within a very short span with the 12 gigabyte version. Nothing in the supply chain is going to be able to explain that. The only thing that can explain it, they wanted to make more money and sell the GPU for more, which at the time, people, especially crypto miners, would buy. Now, most of that market has basically disappeared, and we're left with just the gaming market, and people are not willing to pay these prices. Everything seems to have changed in terms of the product stack. Like a 4060 maybe should have been a 4050, 4070 should have probably been the 4060 Ti, and with that, the pricing is probably $100 too much along with everything else. That's why we've seen the 4060 Ti on sale already. I've seen it for under $399. Even the 4070 when it came out, remember Micro Center did that deal that they would give you a $100 gift card, a Steam gift card. Shows you that people just aren't buying. And the 4060 Ti is probably going to be the worst $500 GPU that we've ever had. It has the performance not much better than a 3060 Ti. 16 gigabytes of VRAM isn't really that crucial in that sort of range of GPU. Much rather have seen it, been $399 or something like that. You have to understand they do either 8 or 16 by the way that the memory, ends up being configured. Like they can only do 12 and 6. It's just the way the technology works. But even then, they could have given it faster memory and they could have jumped up to 12 gigabyte, changed the stack around, made that instead make the 4070 a 4060 Ti. They could have done other things. I think they're trying to get away with using too much software like the LSS3 and everything else that Nvidia has, which, don't get me wrong, a lot of it is, very good, definitely industry leading. but it doesn't really lead with selling GPUs. Gamers want to see raw performance. They want to see that the hardware is really good. Of course, it's efficient, but they also want to see numbers that really outpace last generation. And the 4060 Ti, even the 16 gigabyte model, unfortunately, really isn't adding that much to what you could have gotten last generation. If DLSS 3 isn't a thing for you and a little bit better power draw, it's really, really pointless. And even if it is, at $499, that's probably the worst GPU at that price range we've ever seen. We've never seen something that expensive with this much of like lackluster hardware specifications. Hopefully next generation something changes, or I guess people will just buy, used 4090s forever. Maybe that might last much longer than anything that Nvidia is going to put out for the next like 5 years. Maybe that's the only way to go now. All right, guys, so let me know what you think down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.